Hey, welcome to A Little Better. My name is Daniel. I'll be your host. Today we talk about the Enneagram, fasting, and should Christians take any kind of personality test whatsoever? Find out that and so much more on today's episode. Remember, our goal in this podcast is to know Jesus better and by the power of his Spirit, do better. So together we can be a little better. All right, gentlemen. So here's the question. What's your favorite type of personality test? Or
Enneagram.
Enneagram. What's your Enneagram number?
7.
7. That's not a surprise. Okay.
Yeah. I think I wanted it to be a 4.
I wanted to be a 4.
I thought it was because it was like this
I can see that in you,
artist,
yes.
this martyr, this poetic.
I can see you as that. You're very.
I know.
You're
I
very
thought,
artsy.
but then when
What did you say you are?
Then when 7, and then when I read the chapter on
enthusiast.
7, I was like, "Stink! That is me," and it's so shallow.
Jason, what about you? What's your favorite?
My favorite one is no personality test. I refuse
You don't
to
have
be
a personality?
labeled. Yes, I have no. I think when it comes to like the Enneagram, I'm like a 1 or a 6. I still haven't been able to figure out which one I am. I'm a perfectionist, but I'm also very analytical. So but I don't want to be put in his shoes. So I basically would say every personality test is trying to type you, and nobody can be really typed because we're all so different, even though we might have similar things about us.
That would be another interesting podcast, just talking about personality tests.
Yeah. So my favorite is, I love the Enneagram. Enneagram was so helpful for me, and we'll talk about that later in the next question. But I'm going to give a random one. I don't know if most people have heard of this, the Working Genius Assessment. It's a type of personality test. Patrick Lencioni.
Yeah, it's like a year or two old,
yeah, it's
right?
not
It's
super
pretty
old,
new.
but it talks, your test is all about what kind of work do you enjoy doing.
Right.
And it was so enlightening for me because it was like, oh, that's why there's seasons of church work that I like, just power through, get this done. And then there's other seasons where like, oh, I love everything I'm doing. And I go through these like ebbs and flows of the type of work. But it was just so cool and fun. And he's a Christian. So on their podcast, they even talk about nuancing it for pastors and Christian leaders.
Is he a
was
Christian?
really cool. Yeah, he's Catholic.
He hangs out with a lot. Okay.
Yeah, he's Catholic.
Sure.
He's a practicing Catholic, I think is basically what Patrick
We can get all controversial.
Now we're getting a little...
But
He's part of the Christendom.
Yeah.
so that Working Genius, it sounds very made up to me.
Yes.
Yeah,
I mean,
he did. He talks about making it up.
I only heard
made it
him
up.
interviewed about it, but I'm just like, dude, that just feels so made up.
He said he made it up like in a couple of minutes.
I did
making
find
a lot
it
of
like
money.
helpful. I was like, oh yeah, I can see that. That's definitely
was
true
fun.
about myself. But I still will not be labeled.
All right, so, Jason, here's your question. In light of you preaching the sermon this past weekend, should Christians even take personality tests?
I think they can be helpful. I think it's good to notice trends. I think it comes to the same thing with like psychology. Labels can be helpful to identify patterns in your life and issues that you need to work through, and to see how other people have responded, and to have, I guess, uniform thinking or careful thinking about how to address different ways that we have habits and ways we act.
Yeah, because the heart behind every personality assessment is being self-aware, right? Mm-hmm. And we have to be self-aware. We have to know what is our vice. That's a very Christianese word of like what sinful habits and patterns, and we want to know those things so that we don't fall prey to temptation and just fall into those bad cycles of habits in that regard. Obviously, knowing that most, if not all, personality assessments are not biblically rooted, right? Mm-hmm. But they can be helpful.
Some claim to be without
some claim that's we're getting in like really controversial
Like the spiritual
waters,
gift assessment.
What was Tim LaHaye's
I
old
guess
one?
you could say that.
Remember the spirit-filled temperament? Tim LaHaye, way
I have
way
that
back.
book. I think it's from
The
like my dad's
Phlegmatic,
library, and there's some pretty cool like 70s graphics in it. But
Pretty cool 70s graphics. No one's ever said that sentence before.
It's baptized, but not Christian.
That's hilarious. Yeah, and so they can be helpful, but they can't replace your like walk with Jesus or becoming more like him. Like I've heard, there's the DISC assessment, which is DISC, right? So we have a lot, we use that a lot at Northridge. And I've heard somebody joke, like, the closer you are to the sinners, the closer you are to Jesus. You know, if you're sitting all the way out on the edge of the circle, you're the least like Jesus, which that's really close where my God is. And so, so the closer you are to the sinner, the closer you are like Jesus, because ultimately the goal is looking more like him. I love the Enneagram because it's all motivation focused. It's not necessarily like what you do, but why you do what you do, which gets us to your sermon. So Jason, you gave us a sermon this past weekend. What's your sermon in 60 seconds?
Yeah, we are preaching from the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 6, 1 through 18. Verse 1 of the passage basically summarizes it best, but Jesus says, don't practice your righteousness to be seen by others. You know, if you do, that's the reward you'll get. You'll get praise from them, but practice your righteousness to be seen by God. And so do what you do in secret. And he walks through basically 3 areas of ways we practice our faith: through giving to the needy, through prayer, and through fasting.
Yeah. Which one are you the best at?
Time to shine.
None of them.
You accomplish your sermon well.
I'm least bad at praying, and I've got a lot of work to go there.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny. Brad, what about you?
I am least bad at. Well, I am horrible at fasting, obviously, but prayer, giving to the poor. I have so much room to grow in all 3 of those. I mean, I do. You know, I have grown. Karen's a great partner and just sensitivity to others, but I'm reluctant to say I strive at any of them.
So you say you're not good at fasting, obviously. Well, maybe you are good at fasting because the passage says that you don't want to obscure yourself to make it look like you're fasting.
Hey.
So you're so good at it, we can't even tell.
Deep undercover.
That's what it is. Jason, I loved you bring out in this kind of a large chunk of text. We were talking about how a lot of times this is easily chopped up. Oh, let's talk about our motivation. Let's talk about prayer. Let's talk about giving. Let's talk about like this is 4 sermons that you packaged all together. But you did a really good job at pointing out the connectivity of just the language that Jesus uses about our motivations. Why does God care so much about why we do what we do? Why can't we just do good and it not matter why we do it? Like, why doesn't God just want us to give to the needy just so we can get a good tax deduction? Why doesn't God care that we, pray? Like, why does God care? It seems like more about why we do what we do than less about what we're actually doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes kind of back to the heart of the passage. Is our faith about God, about knowing God, pleasing God, or is it about ourselves? So I think if we're truly walking in step with God, with our goal of our life being to give him glory, then we're naturally going to do those things, but it's not about doing those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so it's this idea of approval, right? And we're either seeking God's approval or seeking men's approval, and how it's obtained too. I mean, it's just exhausting, right, to earn other people's approval, and it's impossible to earn God's approval. So it's not about earning it, but finding it, accepting it. I don't know. It's but that motivation. If you're coming out of a lack, right? You're like, I don't have the approval. I feel inferior. I feel like I've got to fill it somehow, and that's what fuels the hypocrisy.
Yeah.
But to come from a place of just knowing, confident of God's approval.
Yeah.
God's approval, not men's approval.
I mean, the whole Sermon on the Mount is about building God's kingdom, but I think he's trying to help us focus on his kingdom because we're just naturally bent toward living for our own kingdom. And so at the top of our kingdom, we would always be king. So we're always thinking about are people treating me as if I am the king, even if we're not recognizing that. I think what do I not do that I'm not thinking about? How are other people perceiving me in this moment? Even on this podcast, as I speak right now.
Absolutely.
I love that in your sermon, by the way, just that transparency of the self-consciousness, even as you preach, right? It's such a challenge to do it in a way that pleases God without these dangers cropping in.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that leads me to the question, like, if this motivation, there's this language in the passage about your Father in heaven honors what you do in secret. So is religion or our relationship with Jesus, it's a private matter. You keep your nose out of my business, I'll keep my nose out of your business, which seems to have crept in to not only other faiths, but also Christianity. Like, I think there was a stat given by Barna Christian Research Group that I think it was like over 50% of practicing Christians who are millennial or Gen Z think it's morally wrong to share your faith. So that would line up, right? Hey, it's a secret matter. Yeah. So I'm going to keep my faith secret. You keep your faith secret. Let's keep, business and pleasure separated. So is our faith supposed to be secret?
Yeah. I mean, I think that comes out of even like our belief about the separation of church and state. So that's kind of how we've gotten to this place in our society that for at least when it comes to faith, we don't want to push our faith on others. And probably some of that's become because of Christians or other faiths abusing their faith. Instead of, hey, I'm going to winsomely try to persuade you to believe what is true, I'm going to say, no, you have to believe what is true. Otherwise, we're going to take your life, or we're going to persecute you for not believing the same thing that we do. So I think we've responded that way because of some of the sinful patterns of Christians and other faiths. But that doesn't mean that our faith should be private.
But you made the call back to, was it 5:16? Was the passage I preach, which is let your good deeds be seen by others, so God will be glorified.
Yeah. I heard a sermon. I was actually listening to it this past weekend after Nate Miller's sermon, so I guess it was 2 weekends ago. But he was talking about like professing your faith. And from Romans 10, 9 says it's a belief in our heart, but it's a public confession with our mouth, right? And he made this parallel about relationship to being married, right? We wouldn't ask somebody like, "Oh, are you married?" and seeing their wedding band, like, oh, that's none of your business. Like, it's like, no, we're like proud of our spouse. So at least we hope, like, let me tell you about how awesome my wife is or how awesome my husband is. Like in that regard, we're proud about that relationship. Why do we so often equate Jesus like, oh, that's none of your business? Like, don't you keep your faith to yourself, I'll keep my faith to myself. So if we are, you answer the question, and Brad, like all of us, like, okay, no, our faith is not supposed to be just a privatized matter. So help us understand, are we supposed to, take charge of social media, just like let's blast them with Bible verses every day? Or is that helpful? What are helpful public engagements of our faith and unhelpful public engagements with our faith?
Yeah, I feel like there's a tension that if we don't have an active faith, or if we're not really seeking God, then we're not going to talk about it at all. So many of us struggle with the fact that we just don't talk about our faith because in reality, God doesn't have that much of our heart. We talk about the things that we love most. But hopefully, if we are, falling more deeply in love with Jesus, similar to the other things that we love, we will naturally talk about them. And when we do talk about something we love, I think we can talk about it in a winsome way. I think we can also, a danger is that our faith turns intellectual, and I think this is a danger that I struggle with, is that I think this is the right belief, and I've got the right theology, I have the right understanding of our world, I know the true God as he's revealed himself to me in the Bible, and so I can focus more on telling the world about what is right and talking about how their faith is wrong, and that's also not a helpful mentality. So those are some dangers. That doesn't exactly answer your question. I don't know, Brad, if you want to jump in from there.
I don't know. I mean, we'll cycle back to motivation, right? I think people can smell when someone is showing off or trying to impress versus someone's just helpful, humbly saying, I'm just, another beggar, seeking bread. I've God has been merciful to me, and this is the way I express my gratitude. Never be able to repay him. I think that's why it's always so much more powerful to have a witness from a place of disenfranchisement, right? The early Christians, they I mean, there was nothing to be gained. I mean, the Pharisees, they were working the system for their own gain.
Yeah.
But for these Christians, there was nothing to be gained with going public with their faith. It might cost them their lives, their fortunes, everything. Today, we live in a country which, I mean, nearly every president of the United States, has been a professing Protestant Christian. There's only a couple exceptions. A couple of Catholics have slipped in. I mean, we live in a country where it gives you cred to show yourself to be a good Christian, and so that confuses the motivations. I think makes it hard to be authentic. Yeah.
So let's ask this question to try to get some application in this regard of what are some private matters that will help motivate us in the right way to go public with our faith.
Yeah, I mean, I want to jump back into our conversation we were just having, then maybe we can dive into that.
Yeah.
I think, and I brought this up in my message, I think one of the difficulties with social media is we want to be known, we want to be liked, we want to share our lives with other people, but just being on social media itself is a challenge to not make it about how people perceive you. And if you want to be a devoted follower of Jesus, it can be a challenge to even convey our faith without ever having any ill motivations that we are making it about how people perceive our love for God, our devotion toward God. And social media is not the only way that we can practice our faith to be seen by others, but I think that's one way that it's most easy to be like, hey, look at me, look at what a good Christian I am. Here's my Instagram shot with my mug and my Bible open, and I've got this time with God right here.
I think part of it is like, I don't want to bash social media in general, but it almost,
go ahead,
for Christians, like, in that regard, our producer Taylor, like her job is posting our church social media, so I don't want to look at her right now. So
suddenly our microphones no longer work.
Why did we just get muted? Just kidding. But like social media almost is the one way for Christians that we like. Oh, well, I'll just post a Bible verse on social media, and that is me being a witness. When really reality is the reason, hopefully, that people post social media in good motivation. Let's talk about the good that's in social media. Is they want people that they're actually already in relationship with to see their life, right? Like most people don't. Right. The good side of social media is like, hey, I want my family to see this new picture of my kids or my friends. I want them to see when I have good, pure-hearted motivation. And so when it gets tainted is like, oh, I want to get 15 more followers or 1,500 more followers. And I want them to know how good of a Christian I am. And so the heart, taking that good motivation to us now is like, okay, how are the people that you're already doing relationship with? How can you influence them and do good? Let the Father be pleased and honored before your good works before those people. It's not necessarily before the hundreds. I remember when I was a student pastor talking about like share the gospel. I'm not talking about with your entire school. I'm just talking about the friend you sit at lunch with. Like I'm just talking about like that one person in your mind of like how can God be honored in how you, as you've used the word twice already in this conversation, winsomely live before that person. It's not about the thousands and thousands on social media. It's about the neighbor across the street. How can you winsomely live before them?
Yeah. Yeah, man, I feel like ultimately the way we practice our faith and our heart motivation is seen most clearly in the people that we're in relationship with. Yeah. So it's one thing for us to be posting things online about what we're reading or what we think is important, but then the people around us would be like, oh, that's interesting. He keeps posting about all these ways that we should be following Jesus, but
he cussed me out about me mowing a strip in his lawn.
My wife would be like, I don't think you're applying what you just posted or what you said or what you said in your sermon, heart. So I think it happens without trying to tell other people about it, but just simply following God obediently. Which we all struggle with, and we need to confess our sins and ask other people for forgiveness when we sin against them.
So let's talk about the one thing that all of us struggle at most, probably in the West, doing. Fasting. The one way of like following God that seems to be clear in the Old Testament and the New Testament, that it was not just like, hey, whenever you want to, but a regular practice, for a lot of Christians, a weekly practice until more recent days.
Yep.
So let's start with what is it? Because currently in our Western culture or in Christianity, there's been more conversation around different types of fasting. So I'm going to start with this. Are there different types of fasting? When I say types, I mean there's a food fast, social media fast. I'm going to fast from watching Netflix. I'm going to fast from sex. I'm going to fast from fill in the blank. Can we do those things? Are those actual biblical fasts?
Yeah, so the number one reason why I even chose this passage, and I think I mentioned this on Sunday, is I knew I am horrible at fasting, and I wanted to become better about it. So I thought if I preach about it, if I study about it, it's going to force me to not be a hypocrite and
run
at least
towards your conviction.
Do some fasting and learn about fasting. Some of the things that stuck out to me was that we often in sermons talk about, hey, let's not just fast from food. Maybe you choose to fast from social media or fast from chocolate or whatever the thing that you struggle with is. I think biblically speaking, that's never referred to as a fast. So, culturally we talk about it as a fast, and so you could say, I guess, culturally defined, that is a fast. But
I mean, there's whole diets, right?
Yeah. The Daniel diet or
the Daniel plan. Well, that's not even what I'm thinking of. What's the intermittent fasting? Intermittent fasting. That's
a lot of those are about our health. We want to be more healthy, which can be to please God. It could also be because I want to look good on social media or just when people see me in person. But yeah, biblically speaking, those aren't fasts. Those are just abstaining, which abstaining from some of those things can help us to learn some self-discipline and to seek God more than pleasure from those things, find our pleasure in God. But biblically speaking, fasting is abstaining from food, and the reason is so that we can get more of God. So one of the authors talked about, fasting isn't really about abstaining or not getting something. It's about getting, and what it's about getting is getting more of God.
Right.
That's good. So there's not, what would you define all those other categories then? If they're not biblical fasts, what are they?
Yeah, I mean, I think abstaining was the one
Abstaining,
years.
and they often show up maybe in lists of spiritual disciplines, right? There's very disciplines of silence or other things. There's other way. There's self-denials, right? That can be healthy exercises.
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime I'm trying to look at what I love most, a lot of those things come to the top of the list, and I recognize, man, in this moment when I am bored or when I'm tired, I am looking for something to please me in the moment. And so I often go to those things. And so by abstaining for those, we train ourselves to be like, okay, no, where am I going to? I want to go to God, which is very similar to fasting. Just biblically speaking, when fasting is talked about, it's kind of the same idea, but it's abstaining from food. And I think a danger is, we just don't fast much, at least in Protestant Christianity. It's not been super popular in Western society. And so we can easily be like, yeah, I want to fast from social media because I recognize that's a struggle. But we don't do what we see in Scripture most is a scriptural fast. And I think that has an even stronger hold on our body, what we eat, than even some of those other things that we might struggle with.
Yeah, I've heard one author say that when you have an issue of appetite, you should meet it with a spiritual discipline of appetite. So they paralleled lust or gluttony or whatever the case would be with fasting. Hey, you should address whatever your spiritual sin is and what category of motivation that falls in with the same spiritual discipline that falls in this polar opposite motivation, which is appetite. So that would be just connective tissue on that regard. So if biblical fasting is food, it traditionally has been seen of as just a 24-hour, right? That's traditionally how it's been. 12 to 24 hour fast. So it's not this ridiculous Jesus fasted for 40 days and 40 nights. That's what should be on our radar. So for someone that's looking to practice to fast, it's food. It's 12 or 24 hours. What are some other tips that you would give them if they're going to practice, or what have you done in this regard?
Yeah. So one of the biggest reasons why I've struggled with fasting is because I get headaches a lot, and I think a lot of it's tied to my diet. I like sugar. I like caffeine. So I find that, man, if I've gone like 4 or 5 hours and I don't have something else, then I get a headache. And so I've been like, I just don't think I can fast because my body's just going to have a headache. And instead of like enjoying this time with God, I'm just going to have a pounding headache. And so I wouldn't have fasted for that reason. But it wasn't, I think I mentioned this as well. It wasn't until a couple of months ago I had to get a colonoscopy. And so you have a forced 24-hour fast before that. And so
You were quite transparent.
I had to, not eat for 24 hours. I'm like, how is this going to go? I just drank a lot of water. And I was fine, So I'm like, okay, my body can make it. But if your body's not been used to not eating, there's no biblical prescription for how long you need to fast or how much food you abstain from. So I think just start small. It could be a day. It could be a meal. It could be a couple meals. But start there. Some people would say, like, there are some fasts where you abstain from meat, but you would still eat other types of foods. So I feel like just start small, start somewhere, and then build from there. In my, a short practice of it, I have found like 24 hours isn't too difficult as long as I still stay well hydrated. And some fasting would include fasting from water and food. The majority of time, it's mostly just food. Eventually, you're going to need some water.
Yeah, that's good. So what's our 1 minute, as we wrap up, 1 minute other tip, Brad or Jason, either to add on to maybe why someone would want to practice a fast or how this would help, just in this conversation about motivation, how would you would encourage someone if they're really looking to, hey, I want to honor God, I don't want to honor people with my life. How does fasting help, or just one other tip as they're seeking to follow Jesus? In that category?
So I mean, this whole theme of secrecy, with it, because we are so inclined to grab onto that motivation of what others see. So to truly do it secret and not to share it with others. But I know from my own experience of, I am reminded and challenged again that I used to do it with more frequency. It's been a long time, really, since I've fasted. But for me, it's there's sad times. There's sad times because I am just reminded of how dependent I am on food, how I almost idolatrous relationship with it, and pleasure and the rest, and how little I feed on God, how little, so it's often a humbling and a sad experience, but a good experience. I think I need to be humbled by these practices.
Yeah, I would say for me, it's a few things. Like, I need to, from your sermon, practice fasting more. I was actually on a regular rhythm in college, the first of every month. Like, I just took a challenge from my spiritual disciplines professor, do the first of every month and fast for your future spouse and family. And that's what, it's 24 hours that I did every first of the month. I think almost for 3 years in college, that was a normal practice in my life, and, returning back to more of that normal rhythm of fasting intentionally, because it's so easy, like you said, Brad, and others you said as well, Jason, this conversation, being in America in the West, of like, what else do I need? I don't need. I have everything I need. Even, if I'm kind of in the bottom of the totem pole financially, like, I'm still like, I've never feared for hunger. I mean, there are people in our country who do, and they are in extreme poverty, but for the majority, like, I've never like wondered in that regard. Like, even if I'm like $10 in my bank account, okay, I can go get a meal for $10, in that regard. And so reminding myself of how much I am dependent on God for more than just like, a spiritual need, but for all of my needs. I am dependent on Him. And I would push people to read, I think we talked about this, even Isaiah 58 is, the longest passage in Scripture on the right kind of fasting that God honors. And I would recommend reading that and put something in your life, even if it's 12 hours once a month, first of every month, 10th of every month, whatever works for you. Do it, because Jesus doesn't say if, He says when.
I read a book years ago when I was in seminary called A Hunger for God by John Piper, and that was really all about fasting, and the reason behind fasting is ultimately that we would desire more of God. I think in addition to that, I was listening to a sermon by John Mark Comer in preparing for this, and he talked about how when we have sinful habits in our life, one of the greatest practices to end up overcoming some of those sinful habits is to practice fasting. When we practice fasting, it has an ability to, I think when we do that, we recognize how tied all of our desires are to each other, you know. And when you fast, you find yourself to struggle less with lust and so many other areas. So I think just beginning with that practice of fasting, it might start small, you know, maybe one meal or a meal a day, but in doing that, you learn to hunger more for God, and you can break some of the power that sin has in your life.
Awesome. Well, all those resources will be linked in the show notes below. Thanks so much for checking out this week's episode.